It is with great difficulty that I recall the very beginning of my existence. All the events from the time seem confused and blurry. A strange variety of sensations overwhelmed me, and I saw, felt, heard, and smelled all at once. It took a long time before I learned to distinguish between my different senses. Gradually, I remember a brighter light pressed on my nerves, forcing me to shut my eyes. Darkness then enveloped me and disturbed me, but almost immediately after, I believe, opening my eyes again let the light pour in. I moved around and I think I descended, but soon I noticed a change in my feelings. Before, dark and opaque objects surround me, impossible to touch or see clearly, but now I find I can move freely, avoiding or overcoming obstacles. The light grew more overwhelming, and the heat became tiring as I walked, so I looked for a place with shade. I found this in a forest near Ingolstadt, where I laid beside a brook, resting from my fatigue until hunger and thirst overcame me. This awakened me from my almost dormant state, and I ate berries I found hanging from the trees or on the ground. I quenched my thirst at the brook and then laid down, falling asleep. It was dark when I woke up. I also felt cold and half frightened, as if naturally, because I was so alone. Before I left your apartment, I had wrapped myself in some clothes due to a feeling of cold, but they weren't enough to keep out the night's dew. I was a poor, helpless, miserable wretch. I knew nothing and could tell nothing, but as pain overtook me from all sides, I sat down and cried. Soon a gentle light spread across the sky and filled me with a sense of pleasure. I sat up and saw a radiant form rising from among the trees. I gazed at it with a kind of wonder. It moved slowly, but it lit my way, and I went out again to look for berries. I was still cold when I found a large cloak under one of the trees, which I used to cover myself, and I sat down on the ground. No clear ideas occupied my mind. Everything was confused. I felt lightness, hunger, thirst, and darkness. Countless sounds echoed in my ears, and various scents greeted me from all directions. The only thing I could distinguish was the bright moon, and I looked at it with pleasure. Several days and nights passed, and the night sky had greatly diminished when I began to distinguish my sensations from each other. I gradually saw the clear stream that provided me with water and the trees that shaded me with their leaves. I was delighted when I first realized that a pleasant sound, which often greeted my ears, came from the mouths of the little winged animals that often blocked the light from my eyes. I also started to observe more carefully the shapes around me and to perceive the edges of the bright ceilings of light that covered me. Sometimes I tried to copy the lovely songs of the birds, but was unable. Sometimes I wanted to express my feelings in my own way, but the rough and unformed sounds that escaped me made me afraid to speak again. The moon had vanished from the night sky, and once again in a diminished form it appeared. I stayed in the forest, and my senses began to sharpen. Each day my mind gained new ideas. My eyes grew used to the light, allowing me to see objects clearly. I could tell the difference between insects and plants, and eventually I could distinguish one plant from the other. I noticed that the sparrow only made harsh sounds, while the blackbird and thrush sang sweet and inviting songs. One day, when the cold overwhelmed me, I found a fire left by some wandering beggars and felt great joy from its warmth. In my excitement, I put my hand into the live embers, but quickly pulled it back with a cry of pain. I wondered how the same heat could cause such opposite reactions. I looked at the materials of the fire, and to my happiness, I saw it was made of wood. I hurried to gather some branches, but they were too wet to burn. I felt disappointed and sat quietly watching the fire. The damp wood I had placed near the heat dried out and then caught fire. Reflecting on this, I touched different branches and discovered the reason. I then collected a good amount of wood so I could dry it and maintain a steady fire. When night fell and sleep approached, I was very worried that my fire might go out. I carefully covered it with dry wood and leaves and placed wet branches on top. Then I spread my cloak and laid it on the ground, falling asleep. It was morning when I woke up, and my first priority was to check the fire. I uncovered it, and a gentle breeze quickly rekindled it into a flame. I noticed this too and made a fan from some branches, which helped ignite the embers when they were nearly out. When light returned, I was pleased to find that the fire provided both light and warmth, and that this discovery was helpful for my food. I found some of the offals left by travelers had been roasted and tasted much better than the berries I picked up from the trees. So I've tried to cook my food the same way by placing it on the live embers. I learned that this method spoiled the berries, but it improved the nuts and roots significantly. Food, however, became scarce, and I often spent the whole day searching in vain for a few acorns to ease the pangs of hunger. When I found some, I decided to leave the place I had been living in and look for a spot where my few needs could be more easily met. During this move, I deeply lamented losing the fire I had accidentally discovered and did not know how to recreate it. I spent several hours seriously contemplating this challenge. Still, I had to give up trying to produce it, and wrapping myself in my cloak, I headed across the woods towards the setting sun. I spent 3 days wandering and finally reached open country. The night before, a heavy snowfall had covered everything, turning the fields a uniform white. The sight was bleak, and I felt my feet grow cold from the wet, chilly ground. It was about 7 in the morning, and I longed for food and shelter. At last I saw a small hut on a rising ground which had probably been built for the convenience of a shepherd. This was a new sight to me, and I examined the structure with great curiosity. Finding the door open, I entered. An old man sat inside near a fire, over which he was preparing his breakfast. He turned at the sound of my entrance, and upon seeing me, he shrieked loudly. Quitting the hut, he ran across the fields with a speed that his weakened body hardly seemed able to sustain. His appearance unlike anything I'd ever seen before, and his sudden flight somewhat surprised me. But I was enchanted by the sight of the hut. Here the snow and rain could not penetrate, the ground was dry, and it seemed to me that then as exquisite and divine a retreat as pandemonium appeared to the demons of hell across the sufferings in the lake of fire. I eagerly devoured the remnants of the shepherd's breakfast, which consisted of bread, cheese, milk, and wine. However, I did not like the wine. Then, overcome by fatigue, I lay down among some straw and fell asleep. It was noon when I woke up, and drawn by the warmth of the sun, which shone brightly on the white ground, I decided to continue my journey. And after depositing the remains of the peasant's breakfast in a wallet I found, I traveled across the fields for several hours until sunset, when I reached the village. How miraculous this seems! The huts, the neater cottages, and grand houses caught my admiration, one after another. The vegetables in the gardens, the milk and cheese seen in some of the cottage windows tempted my appetite. I entered one of the best of these, but I had hardly stepped inside before the children shouted, and one of the women fainted. The whole village was disturbed. Some ran away, some attacked me, until, badly bruised by stones and various other kinds of projectiles, I escaped to an open country and hid in a low, bare shack that looked quite wretched compared to the places I have seen in the village. This shack, however, was next to a neat and charming cottage, but after my recent painful experience, I dare not to go inside. My shelter was made of wood, but so low that I could barely sit upright. Yet no wood was placed on the earth which made up the floor, though it was dry. And although the wind entered through many small gaps, I found it a comfortable refuge from the snow and rain. Here then I retreated and lay down, happy to have found a shelter, however miserable from the inclemency of the season, and even more from the barbarity of man. As soon as morning dawned, I crept out of my hideout so that I could look at the nearby cottage and see if I could stay in the place I had found. It was located behind the cottage and was surrounded on the sides by a pigsty and a clear pool of water. One side was open, and that's how I had entered, but now I've covered every crack that might reveal me with stones and wood, arranged in a way that I could move them aside to get out when needed. All the light I had came through the pigsty, and that was enough for me. Having arranged my dwellings and covered it with clean straw, I retired, for I saw the figure of a man at the distance, and I remembered too well my treatment the night before to trust myself in his power. I had first, however, provided for my sustenance for that day by stealing a loaf of coarse bread and a cup to drink more easily from the pure water that flowed nearby my retreat. The floor was slightly raised, keeping it perfectly dry, and because of its proximity to the cottage chimney, it was reasonably warm. Having made this decision, I resolved to stay in my humble shelter until something might occur that changed my mind. It was truly a paradise compared to the bleak forest, my former home with rain-dropped branches and damp earth. I ate my breakfast gladly, and I was about to lift a plank to get a little water when I heard footsteps. Looking through a small crack, I saw a young girl with a pail on her head walking past my hut. She was young and gentle in manner, unlike what I later learned about cottagers and farmhouse workers. Yet her clothes were simple, a coarse blue petticoat and a linen jacket, and her fair hair was plaited, but unadorned. She looked patient but sad. I lost sight of her, but about 15 minutes later she returned with the pail, now partly filled with milk. As she moved along, seemingly burdened, a young man met her. His face showed deep sadness. He said a few melancholy words, took the pail from her head, and carried it to the cottage himself. She followed, and they disappeared. Soon after, I saw the young man again holding some tools, crossing the fields behind the cottage while the girl was busy inside the house and in the yard. Upon examining my home, I discovered that one of the cottage's windows had once occupied part of it, but the panes had been filled in with wood. In one of these was a small, almost invisible crack through which the eyes could barely see. Through this crack, a small, whitewashed room was visible, clean but very empty of furniture. In one corner, near a small fire, sat an old man, leaning his head on his hands in a despondent posture. The young girl was busy arranging the cottage. Soon she took something out of the drawer which occupied her hands and sat down beside the old man, who, taking up an instrument, began to play and produce sounds sweeter than the voice of the thrush or the nightingale. It was a beautiful sight, even to me, poor wretch who had never seen anything beautiful before. The silver hair and kind face of the old cottager earned my respect, while the gentle manners of the girl drew my love. He played a sweet, mournful tune which I noticed brought tears to the eyes of his lovely companion, but the old man paid no attention until she sobbed loudly. Then he made a few sounds, and the beautiful creature, leaving her work, knelt at his feet. He lifted her up and smiled with such kindness and affection that I felt feelings of a strange and overwhelming nature. They were a mixture of pain and pleasure, unlike anything I have ever experienced before, from hunger or cold, warmth or food, and I withdraw from the window, unable to bear these emotions. Soon after, the young man returned carrying a load of wood on his shoulders. The girl met him at the door, helped him unload the burden, and took some of the fuel into the cottage, placing it on the fire. Then she and the young man went into a corner of the cottage, where he showed her a large loaf and a piece of cheese. She seemed pleased and went into the garden to gather some roots and plants, which she placed in the water and then on the fire. She continued to work afterwards, while the young man went into the garden, seemed busy digging and pulling up roots. After about an hour, she joined him, and they went into the cottage together. The old man had, in the meantime, been thoughtful, but upon the appearance of his companions, he adopted a more cheerful demeanor, and they sat down to eat. The meal was quickly finished, the young woman was once again busy tidying the cottage, and the old man strolled outside in the sun for a few minutes, leaning on the arm of the youth. Nothing could surpass in beauty the contrast between these two wonderful beings. One was old, with silver hair and a face shining with kindness and love. The younger was slender and graceful in build, with features shaped with the finest symmetry. Yet his eyes and posture revealed deep sadness and despair. The old man returned to the cottage, and the youth, with tools different from those he used in the morning, made his way across the fields. Night quickly fell, but to my great surprise, I discovered that the cottagers had a way of prolonging the light by using tappers. I was delighted to see that the setting sun did not end the pleasure I felt in watching my human neighbors. In the evening, the young girl and her companion were busy with various activities, and I did not understand. And the old man once again took up the instrument that produced the divine sounds that had enchanted me in the morning. As soon as he finished, the youth began not to play, but to utter monotonous sounds, which neither resembled the harmony of the old man's instrument, nor the songs of the birds. I later found out that he was reading aloud, but at that time I knew nothing of the science of words and letters. The family, after engaging in these activities for a short while, extinguished their lights and went to rest, as I surmised. I lay on my straw but could not sleep. I reflected on the events of the day. What chiefly struck me was the gentle manners of these people, that I longed to join them but dared not. I remember too well the treatment I had suffered the night before from the barbarous villagers, and resolved that regardless of the course of action I might hereafter think right to take, I would, for now, stay quietly in my hut, watching and trying to understand what motivated their actions. The cottagers got up the next morning before the sun. The young woman tidied the cottage and prepared the food, and the youth left after the first meal. The day went by with the same routine as the one before it. The young man was always busy outside, while the girl was involved in various hard chores indoors. The old man, who I soon realized was blind, spent his free time playing his instrument or sitting in contemplation. Nothing could surpass the love and respect that the younger cottagers showed towards their wise old companion. They carried out every small act of kindness and duty with gentleness, and he responded with his kind, benevolent smiles. They were not completely happy. The young man and his companion often parted and seemed to weep. I saw no reason for their sadness, but I was deeply moved by it. If such lovely beings could be miserable, it was less surprising that I, an imperfect and lonely creature, should also be wretched. Why were these gentle beings unhappy? They had a beautiful house to my eyes and all the comforts. They had a fire to keep them warm when cold and tasty food when hungry. They wore fine clothes, and more than that, they enjoyed each other's company and conversation, exchanging looks of affection and kindness daily. What did their tears mean? Did they show pain? At first I couldn't figure out these questions, but with patience and time I began to understand many appearances that initially seemed mysterious. A long time passed before I discovered one of the main reasons for the uneasiness of this kind family. It was poverty, and they endured that hardship very painfully. Their food only came from their garden, vegetables, and milk from the one cow, which produced very little in winter when they could barely find enough to feed it. I believe they often felt the sharp pangs of hunger, especially the two younger children, because several times they set food before the old man while saving none for themselves. This act of kindness touched me deeply. I had gotten used to sneaking some of the supplies at night for myself, but when I realized I was causing them pain, I stopped and satisfied myself with berries, nuts, and roots I gathered from nearby woods. I also found another way I could help with their work. I noticed the young man spent a good part of each day gathering wood for their fire. At night, I often took his tools, which I quickly learned how to use, and brought home enough wood to last several days. I remember the first time I did this. The young woman, when she opened the door in the morning, was very surprised to see a big pile of wood outside. She shouted some words loudly, and the young man joined her, showing he was very surprised. I was happy to see that he didn't go to the forest that day, but spent it repairing the cottage and working in the garden. Gradually, I uncovered something even more important. I realized these people had a way of communicating their experience and feelings through spoken sound. I understood that the words they spoke sometimes brought pleasure or pain, smiles or sadness to the minds and faces of those who heard them. This was truly a divine science, and I eagerly wished to learn more about it. However, I was unsuccessful in every attempt I made to do so. The speech was fast, and the words they used, which didn't seem connected to visible objects, made it difficult for me to find any clues to understand what they referred to. Through persistent effort, and after staying in my hut for several moons, I finally recognized the names given to some common objects of conversation. I learned and used the words fire, milk, bread, and wood. I also learned the names of the cottagers themselves. The youth and his companion each had several names, but the old man had only one: Father. The girl was called Sister Agatha, and the youth was either Felix, her brother, or her son. I cannot describe how happy I felt when I learned the ideas associated with each of these sounds and was able to say them. I also identified several other words like good, dearest, and unhappy, but I was not yet able to understand or use them. I spent the winter in this way. The gentle manners and beauty of the cottagers greatly endeared them to me. When they were unhappy, I felt depressed. When they rejoiced, I sympathized with their joy. I saw only a few other human beings besides them, and if anyone else happened to enter the cottage, their harsh manners and rude gait only served to highlight for me the superior qualities of my friends. The old man, I could see, often tried to encourage his children, as I sometimes noticed him calling them to shake off their melancholy. He would speak in a cheerful tone with an expression of goodness that even brought me pleasure. Agatha listened respectfully, her eyes sometimes filling with tears, which she tried to wipe away unnoticed. However, I generally observed that her face and tone grew more cheerful after hearing her father's words of encouragement. It was not the same with Felix. He was always the saddest of the group, and even to my untrained senses he seemed to have suffered more deeply than his friends. But while his face was more sorrowful, his voice was cheerier than his sister's, especially when he spoke to the old man. I could mention countless small instances that, though minor, revealed the nature of these kind-hearted cottagers. Despite poverty and hardship, Felix joyfully brought his sister the first little white flower that peeked out from beneath the snow-covered ground. Early in the morning, before she woke up, he cleared the snow blocking her path to the milk house, drew water from the well, and brought firewood from the outhouse, where, to his constant surprise, he found his stockpile was always replenished by an unseen hand. During the day, I believe he occasionally worked for a neighboring farmer because he often left early and didn't return until dinner time. Yet he never brought any firewood back with him. Sometimes he worked in the garden, but since there was little to do during the frosty season, he read aloud to the old man and Agatha. This reading initially puzzled me greatly, but gradually I realized that he produced many of the same sounds when reading as when talking. I guessed, therefore, that he found symbols on the paper for speech which he understood, and I eagerly desired to understand these as well. But how could that be possible when I didn't even recognize the sounds represented by those symbols? I made noticeable progress in these skills, but not enough to hold any kind of conversation, even though I put my whole mind into trying. I quickly saw that, although I was eager to reveal myself to the cottagers, I shouldn't attempt it until I mastered their language. This knowledge might enable me to help them overlook the deformity of my figure, which I was also too aware of because of the constant contrast it created in my eyes. I had admired the perfect form of my cottagers, their grace, beauty, and delicate complexions, but I was terrified when I saw myself in a clear pool. At first I took a step back, unable to believe that I was really me reflected in the mirror. When I became fully convinced that I was, in fact, the monster I am, I was filled with the bitterest feeling of despair and shame. Alas, I did not yet fully understand the deadly effects of this terrible deformity. As the sun grew warmer and the daylight longer, the snow melted away, revealing the bare trees and the black earth. From that time, Felix was busier, and the heartbreaking signs of an upcoming famine disappeared. Their food, as I later discovered, was coarse but healthy, and they had enough to eat. Several new types of plants appeared in the garden, which they tended, and these signs of comfort grew each day as the season went on. The old man, leaning on his son, walked each day at noon when it did not rain, which I understood as the time when the heavens did not pour forth their waters. This often happened, but a high wind would quickly dry the earth, making the season much more pleasant. than it had been. My way of life in my small shelter was steady. In the mornings, I took care of the cottagers' routines, and when they went off to different jobs, I slept. The rest of the day was spent watching my friends. When they went to bed, if there was a moon or it was starlit, I went into the woods to gather food and fuel for the cottage. When I came back as needed, I cleared their paths from the snow and performed those tasks I had seen Felix do. I later realized that these efforts done by an unseen hand surprised them greatly. Once or twice I heard them say, "Good spirit" and "Wonderful," but I didn't understand what those words meant at the time. My thoughts became more active now, and I yearned to uncover the motives and feelings of these wonderful beings. I was curious to understand why Felix seemed so miserable and Agatha so sad. I foolishly believed that I might be able to bring happiness to these deserving people. When I slept or was away, the images of the wise, blind father, gentle Agatha, and kind Felix appeared before me. I saw them as superior beings who would decide my future. I imagined 1,000 scenes of myself approaching them and how they would welcome me. I thought they would be disgusted until, through my gentle manner and soothing words, I would first earn their trust and then their love. These thoughts thrilled me and inspired me to pursue the art of language with renewed passion. My organs were indeed rough but flexible, and although my voice was far from the soft melody of their tones, I nonetheless pronounced words I understood with reasonable ease. It was like the ass and the lapdog, yet surely the gentle ass whose intentions were kind, even if his manners were rough, deserved better treatment than blows and curses. The pleasant showers and warm sunshine of spring greatly changed the look of the earth. Men who, before this change, had seemed to hide in caves, spread out and took a part in different farming activities. The birds sang more lively tunes, and the leaves started to bud on the trees. Happy, happy earth! A perfect home for gods which no long ago was bleak, damp, and unhealthy. The beautiful sight of nature lifted my spirits. I forgot the past, the present was peaceful, and the future was bright with hope and joy. The birds sang more lively tunes, and the leaves started to bud on the trees. Happy, happy earth! A perfect home for gods which not long ago was bleak, damp, and unhealthy. The beautiful sights of nature lifted my spirits. I forgot the past, the present was peaceful, and the future was bright with hope and joy. I now quickly move to the most moving part of my story. I will describe events that filled me with feelings which, given what I was, had shaped who I am. Spring arrived quickly, the weather turned nice, and the skies were clear. It amazed me that what once was a desert and bleak should now be full of the most beautiful flowers and greenery. My senses were pleased and renewed by countless scents of happiness and countless sights of beauty. It was one of these days when my cottagers were taking a break from work. The old man was playing his guitar, and the children listened. Younger Felix's face looked more pained than I had ever seen. He sighed often, and at one point his father paused his music. I could tell from his manner that he was asking about his son's sadness. Felix answered in a cheerful tone, and the old man was starting his music again when someone knocked at the door. There was a woman on horseback, accompanied by a countryman as her guide. The woman was dressed in a dark suit and covered with a thick black veil. Agatha asked a question to which the stranger only responded by pronouncing in a sweet accent the name Felix. Her voice was musical, but unlike that of either of my friends. When she heard this word, Felix hurriedly approached her, who, upon seeing him, threw back her veil, revealed a face of angelic beauty and expression. Her hair was a shiny black, intricately braided. Her eyes were dark yet gentle and lively. Her features were well balanced, and her complexion was remarkably fair, each cheek tinged with a lovely pink. Felix seemed overcome with joy when he saw her. All the traces of sorrow vanished from his face, and he instantly showed a look of ecstatic happiness that I could hardly believe he was capable of. His eyes sparkled and his cheeks flushed with pleasure. At that moment, I thought he was as beautiful as the stranger. She appeared to be experiencing different emotions, wiping a few tears from her lovely eyes. She held out her hand to Felix, who kissed it rapturously and called her, as well as I could understand, his sweet Arabian. She did not seem to understand him, but smiled. He helped her dismount and, after dismissing her guide, escorted her into the cottage. Some conversation passed between him and his father, and the young stranger knelt before the old man, seeming to want to kiss his hand. But he raised her and embraced her warmly. I soon realized that although the stranger spoke clear sounds and seemed to have her own language, she was neither understood by the cottagers nor by the villagers. They made many signs which I did not understand, but I saw that her presence brought happiness to the cottage, dispelling the sorrow like the sun disperses morning mist. Felix appeared especially happy, and with delighted smiles welcomed his Arabian guest. Agatha, the ever gentle Agatha, kissed the hands of the beautiful stranger and pointed to her brother, made signs that seemed to mean he had been sad until she arrived. Some hours passed this way while they expressed joy with their faces, though I did not understand the reason. Soon, I noticed from a repeated sound the stranger made after them that she was trying to learn their language, and the idea immediately struck me that I should use the same instruments for that purpose. The stranger learned about 20 words in her first lesson. Most of them, indeed, I already understood, but I gained more from the others. As night fell, Agatha and the Arabian woman went to bed early. When they parted, Felix kissed the hand of the stranger and said, "Good night, sweet Safi." He stayed up much later, talking with his father, and from the repeated mention of her name, I suspected that their lovely guest was the main topic of their conversation. I deeply longed to understand them and focused all my efforts on that, but found it completely impossible. The next morning, Felix went out to work, and after Agatha finished her usual chores, the Arabian woman sat at the old man's feet. Taking his guitar, she played some tunes so beautifully that they brought tears of both sorrow and joy to my eyes. She sang, and her voice flowed in a rich rhythm, swelling or fading like a nightingale in the woods. When she finished, she handed the guitar to Agatha, who initially hesitated. She played a simple tune, and her voice accompanied it with gentle tones, but it wasn't as wondrous as the stranger's. The old man looked captivated and said some words which Agatha tried to explain to Safi, words that seemed to mean she brought him immense happiness through her music. The days now passed quietly as before, with the only change being that joy replaced sorrow on my friends' faces. Safi was always cheerful and happy. She and I quickly improved in learning the language, so much so that within 2 months I understood most of the words spoken by my protectors. Meanwhile, the ground was covered with green grass and the banks with countless flowers, fragrant and beautiful, a starry glow among the moonlit woods. The sun grew warmer, and the nights clearer and more pleasant. And my nighttime walks became a great pleasure, though they were shorter because of the late sunset and early sunrise, for I never dared go out during the day, fearful of encountering the same treatment I had suffered in the first village I entered. My days were spent in careful study so I could learn the language more quickly, and I can boast that I improved faster than the Arabian, who understood very little and spoke in broken accents, while I comprehended and could imitate almost every word spoken. As I improved in speaking, I was learned the science of reading and writing as it was taught to the stranger, and this opened up a wide world of wonder and delight before me. The book from which Felix instructed Safi was Volney's Ruins of Empires. I would not have understood the meaning of this book if it hadn't been for Felix, who read it and provided very detailed explanations. He chose this work because its declamatory style mimicked that of Eastern authors. Through this book, I gained a basic understanding of history and a glimpse of the different empires that exist around the world. It gave me insight into the manners, governments, and religions of various nations. I heard about the lazy Asiatics, the incredible genius and mental activity of the Greeks, the wars and noble virtues of early Romans, along with their subsequent decline after the fall of that great empire, chivalry, Christianity, and kings. I also heard about the discovery of the American continent and wept with Safi over the tragic fate of its original inhabitants. These remarkable narrations stirred a wide range of emotions in me. Was man indeed simultaneously so powerful, virtuous, and magnificent, yet also so vicious and base? At one moment he seemed merely a descendant of evil, and at another all that can be imagined as noble and divine. To be a great and virtuous person appeared to be the highest honor that could be bestowed upon a sensitive being. To be base and vicious, as many had been recorded to be, seemed the lowest form of degradation, a state more miserable than that of a blind mole or harmless worm. For a long time I could not understand how one person could go out to murder another, or even why laws and governments existed. But when I heard details of vice and bloodshed, my wonder ceased, and I turned away with disgust and hatred. Every conversation among the cottagers now revealed new wonders to me. As I listened to Felix instruct the Arabian, the complex system of human society was explained to me. I learned about the division of property, vast wealth, and dire poverty, rank, lineage, and noble blood. The words caused me to turn inward. I realized that the most valued possessions by others were noble and pure ancestry combined with riches. A man could be respected with just one of these qualities, yet without either he was often seen, except in rare cases, as a wanderer and as a slave destined to waste his talents for the benefit of the few chosen. And what was I? I was ignorant of my creator and my origin, but I knew I had no money, no friends, no property. I also had a hideous, deformed, and repulsive appearance. I was not even entirely human. I was more agile than humans and could survive on a rougher diet. I endured extreme heat and cold with less harm. My height far exceeded theirs. When I looked around, I saw no one like me. Was I, then, a monster? A blemish on the earth from which all men fled and that everyone disowned? I cannot describe how much suffering these thoughts caused me. I tried to shake them off, but sorrow only grew with knowledge. Oh, how I wish I had stayed forever in my native woods, unaware of or unaffected beyond hunger, thirst, and heat. What a strange nature knowledge is. It clings to the mind once it has seized it, like lichen on a rock. I sometimes wish to shake off all thoughts and feelings, but I learned that there was only one way to overcome the sensation of pain, and that was death. A state I feared yet did not understand. I admired virtue and good feelings, and loved the gentle manners and kind qualities of my cottagers. Still, I was kept from interacting with them, except through means I obtained secretly, when I was unseen and unknown, which did not satisfy my desire to become part of their world. The gentle words of Agatha and the lively smiles of the charming Arabian were not meant for me. The kind advice of the old man and the spirited conversations of my beloved Felix were also not for me. Miserable, unhappy wretch. Other lessons were impressed upon me even more deeply. I learned about the differences between the sexes and about the birth and growth of children, how the father delighted in the smiles of the infant and the playful antics of the older children, how all the life and worries of the mother were focused on her precious charge, how the mind of youth expanded and gained knowledge, and about brother, sister, and all the various relationships that connect one human being to another in mutual bonds. But where were my friends and relatives? No father had watched over my infancy. No mother had blessed me with smiles and caresses. Or if they had, all my past life now seemed like a shadow, a blank void where I saw nothing. From my earliest memories, I had been the same height and shape as I am now. I had never seen anyone resemble me or claiming any connection with me. What am I? The question kept coming back, to be answered only with groans. I will soon explain what these feelings were about, but for now let me return to the cottagers, whose story invoked in me a range of feelings, indignations, delight, and wonder, all of which ultimately led to increased love and reverence for my protectors. For I love to call them that, in an innocent, somewhat painful self-deception. Some time passed before I learned my friend's history. It could not fail to make a deep impression of my mind, as it revealed several circumstances, each interesting and wonderful to someone so entirely inexperienced as I was. The old man's name was de Lacy. He came from a distinguished family in France, where he had lived comfortably for many years, respected by his superiors and loved by his peers. His son was raised in service to his country, and Agatha had ranked among ladies of the highest distinction. A few months before I arrived, they had lived in a large, luxurious city called Paris, surrounded by friends and enjoying every pleasure that virtue, intellectual refinement, or taste combined with the modest fortune could provide. The father of Safi was the cause of their downfall. He was a Turkish merchant who had lived in Paris for many years, but for reasons I couldn't understand, he became unpopular with the government. He was arrested and imprisoned on the very day Safi arrived from Constantinople to be with him. He was tried and sentenced to death. The unfairness of his sentence was clear, all of Paris was outraged, and many believed that his religion and wealth, rather than the crime he was accused of, led to his condemnation. Felix had accidentally been present at the trial. His horror and indignation were uncontrollable when he heard the court's decision. He made at the moment a solemn vow to save him and then look around for the means. After many fruitless attempts to gain admittance to the prison, he found a heavily grated window in the unguarded part of the building, which let up the dungeon of the unfortunate Mohammedan, who, loaded with chains, waited in despair for the execution of the barbarous sentence. Felix visited the prisoner at night and informed him of his intentions to help him. The Turk, amazed and delighted, tried to ignite the zeal of his rescuer with promises of reward and wealth. Felix rejected his offer with contempt, but when he saw the lovely Safi, who was allowed to visit her father and expressed her lively gratitude through her gestures, the young man could not help but admit to himself that the captive possessed a treasure that would fully reward his efforts and risk. The Turk quickly realized the impression his daughter has made on Felix's heart and tried to secure him more firmly to his interests by promising her hand in marriage, as soon as he could be taken to the place of safety. Felix was too delicate to accept that offer, but he looked forward to the possibility of the event as a step towards his happiness. During the following days, as preparations were underway for the merchant's escape, Felix's enthusiasm was filled by several letters he received from this lovely girl, who managed to convey her feelings in her lover's language with the help of an old man, a servant of her father who knew French. She thanked him most ardently for his supposed assistance to her father, and at the same time gently expressed her sorrow about her situation. I have copies of these letters because I managed to get the writing tools during my time in the hut, and Felix and Agatha often held the letters. Before I leave, I will give them to you. They will confirm the truth of my story. But right now, since the sun is already quite low, I will only be able to share the main points of them with you. Safi related that her mother was a Christian Arab, seized and enslaved by the Turks. Admired for her beauty, she won the affection of Safi's father, who married her. The young girl spoke highly and passionately about her mother, who, born free, despised the bondage she was now subjected to. She taught her daughter the principles of her religion and inspired her to seek higher intellectual pursuits and independence of spirit, which were forbidden to women followers of Muhammad. Although her father died, her lessons left a lasting impression on Safi, who grew ill at the thought of returning to Asia and being confined within a harem, where she would be restricted to childish amusements unfit for her noble spirit, which was used to great ideas and a desire for virtue. The idea of marrying a Christian and living in a country where women could attain social rank was very appealing to her. The day scheduled for the Turk's execution was set, but on the night before he escaped from prison and before dawn was many leagues away from Paris. Felix had obtained passports in his father's, sister's, and his own name. He had already shared his plan with his father, who helped the scheme by leaving his house, pretending to go on a journey and hiding himself, along with his daughter, in a secluded part of Paris. Felix guided the fugitives through France to Lyons and across Mount Cenis to Leghorn, where the merchant had decided to wait for a good opportunity to pass into some parts of the Turkish territories. Safi resolved to stay with her father until he left, during which the time the Turk renewed his promise that she would be united with her deliverer. Felix remained with him, waiting for that moment, and in the meantime enjoyed the company of the Arabian, who showed him the simplest and tenderest affection. They communicated through an interpreter, and sometimes through meaningful looks. Safi also sang to him the divine melodies of her homeland. The Turk allowed this intimacy to occur and encouraged the hopes of the young lovers, while in his heart he had completely different plans. He despised the idea that his daughter should be married to a Christian. However, he was afraid of Felix's resentment if he seemed indifferent, because he knew he was still in the power of his captor if he chose to betray him to the Italian authorities where they were staying. He crafted 1,000 schemes to stretch out the deception until it was no longer needed, and secretly take his daughter with him when he left. His plans were made easier by news that came from Paris. The government of France was deeply angry about the escape of their victim and spared no effort to catch and punish his rescuer. Felix's plot was quickly uncovered, and De Lacy and Agatha were thrown into prison. The news reached Felix and woke him up from his joyful dreaming. His blind and elderly father and gentle sister lay in a foul dungeon while he enjoyed fresh air in the company of a woman he loved. This thought was torture to him. He quickly made arrangements with the Turk that if he found a good chance to escape before Felix returned to Italy, Safi should stay as a boarder at the convent in Leghorn. Then, leaving the beautiful Arabian woman, he hurried to Paris and turned himself in to the law, hoping to free De Lacy and Agatha through this act. He did not succeed. They stayed in prison for 5 months before their trial, which resulted in them losing their fortune and being condemned to live in exile from their homeland. They found a miserable asylum in a cottage in Germany, where I discovered them. Felix soon learned that the treacherous Turk, for whom he and his family endured such unheard-of oppression, became a traitor to good feeling and honor after learning that his deliverer was reduced to poverty and ruin. He had left Italy with his daughter, insultingly sending Felix a small amount of money, supposedly to help with some future plan of support. Such were the events that preyed on Felix's heart and made him, when I first saw him, the most miserable among his family. He could have endured poverty, and while this hardship was a consequence of his virtue, he took pride in it. But the ingratitude of the Turk and the loss of his beloved Safi were sorrows more bitter and irreparable. The arrival of the Arabian now breathed new life into his soul. When news reached Leghorn that Felix had been stripped of his wealth and rank, the merchant ordered his daughter not to think about her lover anymore, and to prepare to return to her homeland. Safi's generous nature was insulted by this command. She tried to argue with her father, but he left her angrily, repeating his oppressive order. A few days later, the Turk entered his daughter's apartment and hurriedly told her that he had reason to believe his residence in Leghorn has been exposed, and he would soon be handed over to the French authorities. He had therefore hired a vessel to take him to Constantinople, from which he would depart in a few hours. He planned to leave his daughter in the care of a trusted servant, and to follow at her leisure with the most of his belongings, which had not yet arrived in Leghorn. When alone, Safi resolved in her mind the plan of action that she believed was her duty to follow in this emergency. A residence in Turkey was repugnant to her. Her religion and her feelings both opposed it. Through some papers of her father's that she found, she learned of her lover's exile and discovered the name of the place where he had living at that time. She hesitated for a while, but eventually she made her decision. She took some jewelry that belonged to her and a sum of the money, then left Italy with a companion, a native of Leghorn who spoke the common language of Turkey, and set out for Germany. She arrived safely at the town about 20 leagues from De Lacy's cottage, where her attendant became dangerously ill. Safie cared for her with the deepest devotion. Sadly, the young girl died, leaving the Arabian woman alone. Unfamiliar with the language of the land and completely unaware of the world's customs. However, she was fortunate to be in good hands. The Italian had mentioned the name of their destination, and after her death, the woman of the house where they had lived made sure that Safie arrived safely at her lover's cottage. This was the history of my beloved cottages. It touched me deeply. I learned from the perspectives of social life it revealed to admire their virtues and to disapprove of mankind's vices. Until then, I regarded crime as a distant evil. Kindness and charity were always before me, inspiring a desire to take part in the lively scene where so many admirable qualities were showcased. However, in explaining the development of my mind, I must not forget a circumstance that had happened at the start of August of the same year. One night during my usual visit to the nearby woods, where I gathered food and brought fire home for my protectors, I came across a leather portmanteau on the ground containing several pieces of clothing and some books. I eagerly grabbed the prize and returned with it to my hut. Luckily, the books were written in the language I have learned at the cottage. They included Paradise Lost, the volume of Plutarch's Lives, and the Sorrows of Werther. Possessing these treasures brought me great joy. I now constantly studied and exercised my mind with these histories while my friends went about their usual tasks. I can hardly describe the effort of these books. They invoke countless new images and feelings in me, sometimes lifting me to ecstasy, but more often sinking me into deep despair. In the Sorrow of Werther, besides the interest of its simple and moving story, many opinions are explored. It sheds light on topics that had previously been obscure to me, making it a constant source of thought and amazement. The gentle domestic manners it depicted, combined with lofty sentiments and feelings aimed at something beyond oneself, resonated with my experiences among my guardians and the needs that always lingered in my heart. Yet I thought Werther himself was a more divine being than I had ever seen or imagined. His character was free of pretension but deeply profound. The discussions on death and suicide were meant to fill me with wonder. I did not claim to judge the merits of those arguments, but I learned toward the hero's opinions, and I wept for his demise without fully understanding it. As I read, I found myself applying it much more personally to my feelings and conditions. I felt similar, yet strangely unlike the beings I read about and to whom I listened. I sympathized with and partly understood them, but I was unformed in mind. I depended on no one and related to no one. The path of my departure was free, and no one mourned my destruction. My appearance was hideous, and my stature enormous. What did this mean? Who am I? What was I? Where did I come from? What was my destination? These questions kept reoccurring, but I couldn't find answers. The volume of Plutarch's Lives that I owned included the histories of the first founders of the ancient republics. This book had a very different effect on me than the sorrows of Werther. I learned from Werther's imagination about despair and gloom, but Plutarch taught me noble thoughts. He lifted me above the wretched sphere of my reflections to admire and love the heroes of past ages. Many things I read exceeded my understanding and experience. I had a very vague knowledge of kingdoms, large stretches of land, mighty rivers, and endless seas. However, I was completely unfamiliar with towns and large gatherings of people. The cottage of my guardians had been the only school where I studied human nature, but this book revealed new and more powerful scenes of action. I read about men involved in public affairs, ruling or slaughtering their fellow human beings. I felt an extraordinary desire for virtue rise within me, and I detested vice. As far as I understood the meaning of those words, relative as they were, as I applied them to pleasure and pain alone. I naturally admired peaceful lawgivers like Numa, Solem, Lycurgus more than Romulus and Theseus. The patriarchal lives of my guardians caused these impressions to firmly take root in my mind. Perhaps if my first introduction to humanity has been made by a young soldier eager for glory and slaughter, I would have been filled with a different set of feelings. But Paradise Lost stirred different and much deeper feelings. I read it as I had read the other books that fell into my hands, as if it were a true history. It moved every sense of wonder and awe that the image of an all-powerful god fighting with his creatures could invoke. I often compared several situations, as their similarity struck me to my own. Like Adam, I was unconnected to any other being in existence, but his situation was different from mine in every way. He had come from God's hands as a perfect creature, happy and thriving, protected by the special care of his Creator. He was allowed to talk with and learn from beings of a higher nature. But I was miserable, helpless, and alone. Many times I thought of Satan as a more fitting symbol of my condition because, like him, when I saw the happiness of my guardians, envy and bitterness often grew within me. Another event fortified and confirmed these feelings. Soon after I arrived at the hovel, I discovered some papers in my pocket of the dress I had taken from your laboratory. At first I had ignored them, but now that I could decipher the characters they were written in, I began to study them closely. It was your journal from the 4 months before my creation. You detailed every step of your works in these pages. This account was mixed with reports of domestic events. You probably remember these papers. Here they are. Everything related to my cursed origins contained within them. The full story of the terrible circumstances that caused it is displayed. Even the smallest details about my ugly and repulsive form are included, written in language that captures your horrors and made mine unforgettable. I felt sick as I read. "Hateful day when I received life!" I exclaimed in agony. "Cursed Creator, why did you make a monster so grotesque that even you recoiled from it? God had a pity made man beautiful and appealing in his image, but my form is a filthy copy of yours, even more horrid despite the resemblance. Satan had his fellow devils to admire and encourage him, but I am alone and hated. These were the reflections of my hours in despair and solitude. Still, when I consider the virtues of my cottagers, their kind and charitable temperaments, I convinced myself that when they came to know my admiration of my virtues, they would pity me and overlook my deformity. Could they turn away from their door a single individual, no matter how monstrous, who begged for their compassion and friendship? I decided at least not to lose hope, but to prepare myself in every way for an encounter with them that would determine my fate. I delayed this attempt for a few more months because I was afraid I might fail. Given how much I valued its success, additionally, I noticed that my understanding grew better each day. So I didn't want to start this journey until a little more time had added to my wisdom. Several changes occurred in the cottage in the meantime. Safi's presence spread happiness among its inhabitants, and I also discovered that a greater sense of abundance prevailed there. Felix and Agatha spent more time in amusement and conversation, assisted by servants in their chores. They didn't seem wealthy, but they were content and happy. Their feelings were calm and peaceful, while mine grew increasingly tumultuous. The increase in knowledge only made it clearer to me how miserable an outcast I was. I did hold on to hope, but it faded when I saw my reflection in water or the shadow in the moonlight, just like that fragile image in fickle shade. I tried to overcome these fears and prepare myself for the trial I planned to face in a few months. Sometimes I let my thoughts, unrestrained by reason, drift into the realm of paradise, daring to imagine kind and peaceful creatures sympathetic to my feelings and lifted my spirits. Their angelic faces smiled with comfort, but all of it was just a dream. No Eve comforted my sorrows or shared my thoughts. I was alone. I remember Adam's plea to his creator, but where was mine? He had left me, and in the bitterness of my heart, I cursed him. Autumn passed in this way. I observed with surprise and grief how the leaves decayed and fell, and the nature once again took on the barren and bleak look it had when I first saw the woods and the lovely moon. Still, I paid no mind to the cold weather. My health was better suited for enduring cold than heat. My greatest pleasures were the sight of flowers, birds, and all the bright colors of summer. When those disappeared, I turned more attention to the cottagers. Their happiness did not diminish without summer. They loved and sympathized with each other, and their joys, which depended on one another, continued despite the hardships around them. The more I observed them, the stronger my desire grew to seek their protection and kindness. My heart longed to be known and loved by these kind-hearted creatures. To see their gentle expressions directed towards me with affection was the highest goal of my dreams. I dared not imagine they would turn away from me with disdain and horror. The poor who came to their door was never sent away. I asked, indeed, for greater treasures than just food or rest. I sought kindness and sympathy, but I did not believe I was completely unworthy of it. The winter progressed, and a whole cycle of seasons had passed since I came to life. My focus at this moment was solely on my plan to introduce myself into the cottage of my protectors. I considered many ideas, but the one I settled on was how to enter the house when the blind old man should be alone. I had enough insight to realize that the unnatural ugliness of my appearance was the main source of horror for those who had seen me before. My voice, though rough, was not inherently frightening. I thought that if I could gain the old de Lacy's goodwill and influence when his children were away, I might be able to be tolerated by my younger protectors through him. One day, as the sun shone on the red leaves covering the ground and spread cheerfulness even though it did not bring warmth, Safi, Agatha, and Felix went on a long country walk, leaving the old man alone in the cottage if he wished. After his children left, he picked up his guitar and played several mournful yet beautiful tones, more sweet and mournful than I had ever heard him play before. At first, his face lit up with pleasure, but as he kept playing, thoughtfulness and sadness took over. Finally, he put down the instrument and sat quietly, lost in thought. My heart beat quickly. This was the hour and moment of trial that would decide my hopes or realize my fears. The servants have gone to a neighboring fair. All was silent in and around the cottage. It was an excellent opportunity. Yet when I proceeded to execute my plan, my limbs failed me, and I sank to the ground. Again I rose and exerted all the firmness I could muster, removed the planks I had placed before my hovel to conceal my retreat. The fresh air revived me, and with renewed determination I approached the door of the cottage and knocked.
Who is there? Come in.
Pardon this intrusion. I am a traveler needing some rest. Please oblige me if you allow me to remain a few minutes before the fire.
Enter, and I will try to relieve your wants. Unfortunately, my children are away from home, and as I am blind, I am afraid I will find it difficult to procure food for you.
Do not trouble yourself, my kind host. I have food. I need only warmth and rest. I sat down, and a silence ensued. I knew every minute was precious to me, yet I remained irresolute about how to commence the interview with the old man addressed me.
By your language, stranger, are you my countryman? Are you French?
No, but the French family educated me and understands that language only. I am now going to claim the protection of some friends whom I sincerely love and of whose favor I have some hopes.
Are those friends Germans?
No, they are French, but let us change the subject. I am an unfortunate and deserted creature. I look around and I have no relation or friend on earth. These amiable people to whom I gave never saw me and know little of me. I am full of fears, for if I fail there, I will forever be an outcast in the world.
Oh, do not despair. To be friendless is indeed to be unfortunate, but the hearts of men, when unprejudiced by any apparent self-interest, are full of brotherly love and charity. Rely, therefore, on your hopes, and if these friends are good and amiable, do not despair.
They are kind. They are the most excellent creatures in the world. Unfortunately, they are prejudiced against me. I have good disposition. My life has been hitherto harmless and somewhat beneficial, but a fatal prejudice clouds their eyes, and where they ought to see a feeling and kind friend, they behold only a detestable monster.
That is unfortunate, but if you are blameless, can you not deceive them?
I am about to undertake that task, and it is on that account that I feel so many overwhelming terrors. I tenderly love these friends. I have, unknown to them, been in the habits of daily kindness towards them for many months, but they believe that I wish to injure them, and it is that prejudice I want to overcome.
Where do these friends reside?
Near the spot.
If you unreservedly confide in your tale's particulars, I may help undeceive them. I am blind and cannot judge your countenance, but something in your words persuades me that you are sincere. I am poor and in exile, but it will afford me true pleasure to be serviceable to a human.
How could I thank you, my best and only benefactor? From your lips I first heard the voice of kindness directed towards me. I shall be forever grateful. Your present humanity assures me of success with those friends I am about to meet.
May I know the names and residence of those friends?
I paused. I thought this was the moment of decision, which was to rob me of or bestow happiness on me forever. I struggled vainly for firmness sufficient to answer him, but the effort destroyed all my remaining strength. I sat on the chair and sobbed aloud. At that moment, I heard the steps of my younger protectors. I had not a moment to lose, but seizing the hand of the old man, I cried, "Now it is the time! Save and protect me! You and your family are the friends whom I seek! Do not desert me in the hour of trial!"
Great God! What are you?
At that instant, the cottage door was opened, and Felix, Safi, and Agatha entered, who can describe their horror and consternation on beholding me. Agatha fainted, and Safi, unable to attend to her friend, rushed out of the cottage. Felix darted forward and with supernatural force tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung. In a transport of fury, he dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick. As the lion rends the antelope, it could have torn him limb from limb, but my heart sank within me as with bitter sickness, and I refrained. I saw him on the point of repeating his blow, when overcome by pain and anguish, I quitted the cottage, and in the general tumult escaped unperceived to my hovel. Cursed Creator, why did I live? Why in that moment did I not destroy the spark of life you so recklessly gave? I do not know. Despair has not yet taken hold of me. My feelings were anger and revenge. I could have happily destroyed the cottage and its inhabitants, releasing their screams and suffering. When night fell, I left my retreat and wandered into the woods. Now, no longer held back by the fear of discovery, I released my anguish with fearful howls. I was like a wild beast that had broke free from its traps, destroying anything that blocked my way and rushing through the woods with the speed of a stag. Oh, what a miserable night I endured! The cold stars mockingly shone above me, and the bare trees waved their branches over me. Sometimes the gentle voice of a bird broke the absolute silence. Everyone else was at rest of enjoying themselves. I, like the arch-fiend, carried a hell inside me, and feeling unheard, wished to tear down the trees, spread chaos and destruction around, and then sit down to enjoy the resulting ruin. But this was a fleeting luxury of sensation that could not last. I grew tired from excessive physical exertion and sank onto the damp grass in the sick despair of helplessness. Among the countless men, there was no one who would pity or help me. And should I feel compassion for my enemies? No! From that moment, I proclaimed eternal war against mankind, and more than that, against him who had created me and sent me into this unbearable misery. The sun rose. I heard men's voices and knew it was impossible to return to my retreat that day. So I hid myself in some thick underbush, deciding to spend the coming hours reflecting on my situation. The pleasant sunrise and the fresh air of the day restored a certain amount of peace within me, and when I reflected on what had happened at the cottage, I could not help but think I had been too quick to judge. I had certainly acted recklessly. It was clear that my conversation had engaged the father on my behalf, and I was foolish to have put myself in the horror of his children's view. I should have made the old De Lacy more comfortable with me, and gradually revealed myself to the rest of his family when they would have been ready for my approach. But I did not believe my mistakes were beyond repair, and after much thought I decided to go back to the cottage, find the old man, and try to win him to my side through my words. These thoughts soothed me, and in the afternoon I sank into a deep sleep, but the fever in my blood prevented me from having peaceful dreams. The terrible scene from the previous day constantly played before my eyes. The women were fleeing, and the furious Felix was pulling me away from his father's feet. I woke up exhausted, and when I saw that it was already night, I crept out of my hiding place and went looking for food. When my hunger was satisfied, I made my way toward the familiar patch that led to the cottage. Everything was peaceful. I slept into my shelter and waited silently for the usual hour when the family would rise. That hour passed and the sun climbed high in the sky, but the cottagers did not appear. I trembled intensely, fearing some terrible misfortune. The inside of the cottage was dark, and I heard no movement. I cannot describe the agony of the suspense. I continued the rest of the day in my hovel, overwhelmed by utter and foolish despair. The protectors had left, breaking the only connection I had to the world. For the first time, feelings of revenge and hatred filled my heart, and I did not try to control them. Instead, I let myself be carried away by the flow, directing my mind towards harm and death. When I thought of my friends, of De Lacy's gentle voice, Agatha's kind eyes, and the beautiful Arabian, these thoughts disappeared, and a flood of tears eased my pain. But again, when I remembered that they had rejected and abandoned me, anger returned in intense rage, and unable to harm anyone human, I turned my fury towards lifeless objects. As night fell, I gathered various combustibles around the cottage. After destroying all the crops in the garden, I waited impatiently until the moon sank so I could begin. As the night deepened, a fierce wind arose from the woods and quickly dispersed the clouds that had lingered in the sky. The blast tore through like a mighty avalanche and caused a kind of madness in my spirits that shattered all bounds of reason and reflection. I let the dry branch of the tree and danced angrily around the devoted cottage, my eyes still fixed on the western horizon, where the moon almost touched the edge. Part of its orb was finally hidden, and I waved my torch. It sank, and with a scream I set fire to the straw, heath, and bushes I had gathered. The wind fanned the flames, and the cottage was swiftly engulfed by the fire, which clung to it and licked it with their forks and destructive tongues. As soon as I was sure that no help could save any part of the shelter, I left the scene and took refuge in the woods. And now, with the world before me, where should I turn my steps? I decided to run far from the place of my misfortunes, but to me, hatred and despair, every country seemed equally terrible. Eventually, the thoughts of you crossed my mind. I learned from your papers that you were my father, my creator, and to whom could I turn more appropriately than to the one who had given me life? Among the lessons Felix had given Safi, geography was not overlooked. I had learned from these the relative locations of different countries on Earth. You had mentioned Geneva as your hometown, and I decided to go there. But how was I supposed to guide myself? I knew I needed to go southwest to reach my destination, but the sun was my only guide. I didn't know the names of the towns I would pass through, nor could I ask anyone for information, but I refused to give up. Only you could offer me help, although I felt nothing but hatred towards you. Heartless, unfeeling creator, you gave me perceptions and passions and then threw me out into the world as an object of scorn and terror for mankind. Yet only you deserve my pity and justice, and from you I intend to seek the fairness I unsuccessfully tried to find from any other human being. My travels were long, and the suffering I endured was intense. It was late autumn when I left the district where I had lived for so long. I traveled only at night, afraid of encountering a human face. Nature decayed around me. The sun lost its heat. Rain and snow fell around me. Mighty rivers were frozen. The ground was hard, cold, and bare, and I found no shelter. Oh, earth! How often did I curse the cause of my existence? The gentle side of my nature had left me, and everything within me turned to bitterness and rage. The closer I got to your home, the more deeply I felt revenge stirring in my heart. Snow fell, waters froze, but I moved on without resisting. A few events guided me, and I had a map of the area, but I often strayed far from my path. The pain inside me gave me no relief. No event occurred that didn't feed my anger and misery, but one incident when I reached the border of Switzerland, when the sun regained its warmth and the earth started to turn green again, confirmed especially the bitterness and horror I felt. One morning, however, when I found that my path led through a deep forest, I decided to continue my journey after sunrise. The day, one of the first in spring, uplifted even me with its beautiful sunshine and warm air. I felt feelings of gentleness and happiness that had long seemed dead come alive again. Surprised by these new emotions, I let myself be carried away by them, and forgetting my loneliness and deformity, dared to feel happy. Soft tears again wetted my cheeks, and I even looked up gratefully towards the blessed sun which brought me such joy. I continued wandering through the woods until I reached its edge, where a deep, swift river flowed, its banks lined with trees whose branches bent over the water, now budding with new spring growth. I paused here, unsure which path to take, when I heard the voices that made me hide under the shade of a cypress. I was barely out of sight when a young girl ran towards the place where I was hidden, laughing as if she was fleeing from someone in play. She continued along the steep riverbank until suddenly her feet slipped and she fell into the fast-moving water. I hurried out of my hiding spot and, struggling against the current, managed to save her and pull her to the shore. She was unconscious, and I tried everything I could to revive her, when I was suddenly interrupted by the arrival of a rustic, probably the person she had been playing hide-and-seek from. When he saw me, he rushed towards me, and pulling the girl out of my arms, hurried into the deeper woods. I followed quickly, not really sure why, but when the man saw me get closer, he aimed his gun at me and fired. I fell to the ground, and the attackers, moving even faster, fled into the woods. This was then the reward for my benevolence? I had saved a human being from destruction, and in return, I now writhed from the terrible wound that tore through flesh and bone. The feelings of kindness and gentleness I had just moments before had given way to hellish rage and gnashing of teeth. Fueled by pain, I swore eternal hatred and vengeance against all mankind. But the agony of my wound overwhelmed me. My pulses stopped and I fainted. For several weeks I lived a miserable life in the woods, trying to heal the wound I had received. The ball had entered my shoulder, and I didn't know whether it stayed there or had passed through. In any case, I had no way to remove it. My suffering was worsened by the oppressive feelings of injustice and ingratitude for what they had done. My daily vows grew to seek revenge, a deep and deadly revenge, the only thing that could make up for the outrages and pain I had suffered. After a few weeks, as my wound healed, I continued my journey. The labors I endured were no longer soothed by the bright sun or gentle breezes of spring. All joy seemed like a mockery that insulted my desolate state and made me painfully realize I was not made for pleasure. But my toils now drew near an end, and in 2 months from then I reached the outskirts of Geneva. It was evening when I arrived, and I retreated to a hiding spot among the surrounded fields to decide how I should deal with you. I was overwhelmed by fatigue and hunger, and too unhappy to enjoy the gentle breeze of the evening or the sight of the sun setting behind the towering Jura mountains. At this moment, a slight sleep eased me from the pain of reflection, which was interrupted by the approach of a beautiful child who came running into the chosen recess, full of the playfulness of youth. Suddenly, as I looked at him, an idea occurred to me that this little creature was free of prejudice and had lived too briefly to develop a fear of deformity. If I could seize him and raise him as my companion and friend, I would not have to be so lonely in this crowded world. Urged by this impulse, I seized on the boy and drew him towards me. As he passed, as soon as he beheld my form, he placed his hands before his eyes and uttered a shrill scream. I pulled his hands forcibly from his face and said, "Child, what is the meaning of this? I do not intend to hurt you. Listen to me."
Let me go! Monster! Ugly wretch! You wish to eat me and tear me to pieces! You are an ogre! Let me go or I'll tell my papa!
Boy, you will never see your father again. You must come with me.
Hideous monster! Let me go! My papa's a cynic! He's Mr. Frankenstein! He will punish you! You dare not keep me!
Frankenstein. You belong then to my enemy, to him towards whom I shall sworn eternal revenge. You shall be my first victim. The child still struggled and loaded me with epithets who carried despair to my heart. I grasped his throat to silence him, and in a moment he lay dead at my feet. I gazed on my victim, and my heart swelled with exultation and hellish triumph. I, too, can create desolation. My enemy is not invulnerable. This death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him. And my heart swelled with triumph and wicked joy. Clapping my hands, I exclaimed, "I too can bring destruction! My enemy is not invincible! This death will fill him with despair, and 1,000 other miseries will torment and ruin him!" As I fixed my eyes on the child, I saw something sparkling on his chest. I took it. It was a portrait of a very beautiful woman. Despite my bitterness, it softened me and grew me in. For a few moments I gazed with pleasure at her dark eyes, edged with long lashes, and her lovely lips. But soon my anger returned. I remembered that I was forever denied the joys that such beautiful beings could give, and that she, whose likeness I was looking at, would, in her regard for me, had changed that divine kindness into one of disgust and fear. Could you wonder that such thoughts filled me with rage? I only wondered that at that moment, instead of venting my feelings in cries and agony, I did not rush among mankind and perish trying to destroy them. While these feelings overwhelmed me, I left the spot where I had committed the murder, and seeking a more secluded hiding place, I entered a barn that appeared to be empty. A woman was sleeping on some straw. She was young, not quite as beautiful as the woman in the portrait that I held. But she had an agreeable appearance and was blooming with the loveliness of youth and health. Here, I thought, is someone whose joy-bringing smile is given to everyone but me. Then I bent over her and whispered, "Awake, fairest, thy lover is near. He who would give his life just to see a single look of affection from thine eyes, my beloved, awake!" The sleeper stirred. A thrill of terror ran through me. Should she instead wake, see me, curse me, and announce the murderer? That is exactly how she would act if her darkened eyes would open and she saw me. The thought was madness. It awakened the fiend inside me. It's not I, but she who shall suffer. The murder I committed was because I am forever robbed of all she could give me. She must atone. The crime stemmed from her. Let her bear the punishment. Thanks to Felix's lesson and the savage laws of men, I have now learned to do harm. I bent over her and tucked the portrait securely into one of the folds of her dress. She moved again, and I escaped. For several days, I haunted the place where these scenes had taken place, sometimes longing to see you, sometimes determined to leave the world and its sufferings forever. Eventually, I wandered into these mountains and explored their vast depths, driven by a burning passion that only you can satisfy. We cannot part until you promise to fulfill my request. I am alone and miserable. Mankind refuses to associate with me, but someone as deformed and horrible as myself would not refuse herself to me. My companion must be of the same kind and share the same flaws. This being you must create.